Welcome, everyone. My name is Koen Geesing. I'm a CPO and co-founder of Properly. And today we're going to discuss the topic of how to streamline your journey to net zero. And well, who will be a better person to discuss this topic with than Charlotte Jongejan, um, Director of Sustainability and Communications of the Gateway Fund. And I'm thrilled to talk with you about this complicated topic. Um, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on sustainability in the real estate industry and how we can make the all the strategies and all the theory, how we can put that into practice. But first, maybe you can start by giving a short introduction about yourself and about the Gateway Fund.
Absolutely. Thanks, Koen. It's really great to be here. I'm very honored that you asked me as a kickoff to this new series of webinars. I hope I do it justice. My name is Charlotte Jongejan. I'm originally from New Zealand. I'm half Dutch, half Kiwi, hence the accent. It's always good to clarify that at the start. People are very confused with the surname and then the Dutch face and then the Kiwi accent. So that's where that comes from. My background academically is in political science, so something completely different. But I moved after university into advertising, where I discovered the joy of telling stories, worked as a copywriter and an account manager there. And then after that, moved into reforestation and was the head of marketing communications before I decided that this was my calling. I wanted to marry the worlds of communication and sustainability and make a difference in that way. And I've been out on my own independently for the last almost 6 years, working in a lot of different sectors, from waste management to solar energy to tackling plastic pollution, and now in real estate, which is a completely different beast. Much needs to happen, much is happening, and it's a steep learning curve, but it's been very, very interesting, and I'm excited to talk with you about that.
Yes, yeah, as you mentioned, it's a beast indeed. The real estate industry. I guess there's also a lot of room for improvement. A lot is happening indeed, and I'm really excited to talk about that. But maybe can you explain a little bit about the Gateway Fund?
Sure. The Gateway Fund is a logistical, light industrial real estate fund, commercial real estate fund. Currently, we have 52 assets, which is about 750 million assets under management. And the focus is on long-term investment strategies. Our assets range from super large distribution centers to smaller last-minute hubs near city centers. Also some light industrial. So, there's things like assembly stations. We have a lot of great tenants who stay for a long time because they're happy, I guess. So the fund is doing well. It's a healthy fund. We have 100% occupancy. It's managed by a team at Schroders Capital and, of course, our property managers.
All right. Okay, so a little bit about the ESG. Well, there are a lot of words. ESG,
For sure.
net zero, Paris proof, and then you've got all the different frameworks that the CREM and the EPRA and God knows what. So, can you tell me a little bit how you look at all of this?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start because also for many people, it's the reason not to get involved or to postpone or to hire in expensive consultants to take care of it because it feels like a very daunting prospect and incredibly complicated. I think real estate and finance, for that matter, are worlds where the landscape is littered with acronyms and standards and
Yeah,
hype. It's really important, even though it's really hard, to not get sucked up into that world of meetings and conferences and a new platform being launched. And this is the solution to all your problems. Everything is being sold to you as you have to do this right now or you
yeah,
will fail. And I think not enough people in the industry really take the time to take a step back and think about and take the perspective of what's actually important, which is the planet. It's
yeah.
really quite simple. but we make it incredibly complicated. Take a bit of perspective and think about why we're doing this. It's about humans, it's about animals, it's about our children, it's about trying really hard in whatever sphere of influence you have to make a difference. How do we even get here? Where will this end? And what can we do? I think, not getting caught up in a sense of hopelessness is really hard when it comes to anything related to the climate crisis. You hear it all the time. Young people especially, becoming, depressed and feeling like they don't have any control. So what control do we have? We're in a very privileged position. We're a rich Western country, and within that country, even we're the top 1%. We have the power to change policy. We have the power to have a impact within our companies, within our sector. So what are we doing with that responsibility? So that, feels like a lot, but that's what I do try to keep in mind every day. Every meeting I have and every conversation is about, well, what can we do? Not, how can we make this policy look better on paper, or how can we make this more attractive to the investors, but what can we actually do? And I think that has a positive influence because we can do a lot. We have these buildings, we have these portfolios of assets, and we can make differences. We can make changes that really have an impact. So that keeps me excited and it keeps the team motivated. So keep that bigger picture in mind and then act decisively within your own realm of influence. Also, ESG just means sustainability. I think it's always good to mention that because it's a term made up by the sector of the finance sector, and it just means, how can we be more sustainable as an industry? So
exactly, it is sustainability. It's the three different pillars.
For sure.
Environmental, social, governance. I think environmental is far and large the largest pillar that everybody focuses on, especially in the real estate industry.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to hear you say, to keep on going back to the question, what can we do? So again, how can we put it into practice? What's the influence that we actually have, and how can we make a difference? Because I think a lot of parties in the industry, a lot of companies are more looking at, okay, do we comply?
For sure.
What's being asked of us? What's the minimum requirements, and how can we tick them off? And that's a completely different mindset.
Completely. And it changes the way that you literally run your business. And I think Gateway is a really great example, which is why I'm excited about what we're doing, is we have just flipped that on its head from the very start. We said, well, what do we have? How are they performing? And what can we do? Instead of, we want to comply with this framework and we want this stamp of approval, we want this certification, and then what actions are needed to get there. So I agree. It's about flipping it on its head. And of course, there's always going to be regulations that you do need to comply to, because we are in a regulatory sector where, all those things are important. But if that is leading in every decision and every conversation you're having, you're losing the potential of the impact that you can have. So, and it's also a lot less fun to work with.
I completely agree. So can you explain a bit what role does sustainability play in the Gateway Fund?
Sure. Well, I mentioned it a wee bit already. I think Gateway is really a pioneer within the logistics sphere of commercial real estate, for sure, but even broader. When I speak to other funds and other companies, I realize every time, oh wow, we are, tackling this in a completely different way. That means we're integrating sustainability in our ways of working, in our portfolio, in our mindset, and that means we go beyond the regulatory and the strict necessary. And we look at sustainability from a holistic perspective. We don't just focus on how can we make this building more energy efficient, but actually, how can we look at this building and use it in a different way? And can we also think about water? And can we also think about biodiversity, which is a word that you don't hear very often in combination with logistics real estate, but it's something we're super focused on and making big steps in. We found some great partners, and we're actually in the middle of deploying that policy right now, which is great. And that really just shows that we're willing to try new things, which also means not everything works. It means, you've been part of these conversations, Kuhn, where we're literally sitting around the table, racking our brains of how can we make this, how can we automate this goal, or how can we turn this KPI into an action? And sometimes we can't, and we have to accept that and move on. But that's part of kind of pioneering. And so that's also what makes it fun. We always try to keep things practical. And move from the theory into the practical. And that's also why, and I know we'll talk about that later, our property manager is so important, and we work with them very closely because we always want to make sure that what we're thinking up in meeting rooms is achievable on the ground. And I think that's kind of key to thinking about sustainability in real estate. We want to obviously deliver the best results for our investors and provide our tenants with amazing quality assets. But those things kind of naturally flow from the way we work anyway. I guess a few examples of kind of going beyond when it comes to sustainability is circularity is something that we're really interested in and doing a lot with. So using circular materials and methods when it comes to maintenance and repairs. That's something that we're integrating and trying to automize as well within the Proprli dashboard. And then biodiversity and climate adaptivity, which is just a fancy word for saying how can you make sure that your building and your terrain is not going to flood and can deal with the changing climate. So the really hot hots and the really wet wets, which is where we're kind of moving to in the Netherlands.
Which I guess with a light industrial portfolio, which has naturally a lot of
concrete
services, a lot of concrete, can be an interesting topic to.
It is. It's super interesting, and luckily there's a few actors in that space. One that we're working with now is NL Green Label. And they're really focused on greening the built environment and doing it in a way where data is key so that you can track progress and see where you're at and see what impact you're having with the changes you're making. And that's exactly how we like to work as well. And they have very close ties within the world of, the people that execute basically on greening. And a lot of innovations when it comes to exactly kind of concrete and different types of materials that absorb water or retain water underground, levees, those types of innovations are becoming more and more important, where you can, capture the water and then reuse it in a way when it's drier. So those are the types of innovations that we're looking at integrating within the Gateway portfolio as well.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear. And I think one of the main, you touched upon it already a bit, but the difficulty, I guess, is to go from strategy to something practicable, to something that you can actually execute. And then you have, and to make it measurable. So how can you make sure that you're actually living up to the goals that you set in your strategy? And you cannot do this alone. So you need to have a team, and it's not something that can be thought of in a meeting room in just at your offices, because you probably need other stakeholders the property manager to be aligned. So how do you deal? Can you explain a little bit how you deal with keeping all the stakeholders aligned and making sure that you can put things into practice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's kind of the crux of either having a successful sustainability strategy or one that ends up in a PowerPoint presentation tucked away in an archive somewhere. And I think there's two answers. One is it's an iterative process, and you have to accept that and also be enthusiastic about that. It's going to change. It's not going to be the way you implement is not going to be the way you presented it, 16 months or 18 months prior, because that's the amount of time often that it takes to get all the stakeholders aligned. And from the start, where you're sitting with your fund manager and brainstorming ideas, to involving your property manager from an early stage, to involving your data platform, which is Proprli in this case, also from a really early stage. You were involved in those conversations when we were just kind of dreaming up what could be. Getting your management team aligned, presenting it to your investors and getting them on board. So there's a lot of people that need to be educated about what you're trying to achieve, and then also need to be involved in the rollout. So it takes a while. It's going to change, and open, honest communication. I think that's the second pillar. That's also very important. Being honest about things that aren't working or aren't going to work, and then being flexible and changing and adapting your strategy when needed. So I think with regulation and frameworks constantly changing within ESG, as you know, it is important to get experts in when needed. So we've got someone on the legal side of things. We've got a really great legal firm that's kind of involved on looking at what we're doing and judging if it's still within the boundaries of compliance. So that part is important. And then getting your property managers to look at things from kind of a practical implementation point of view, keeping tenants involved. That was a really important part of it as well. And that's also something where your property managers are key. And I think just having an open dialogue. So sometimes putting a topic on the table and saying, how can we tackle this? Any ideas? You know, that often that question led to the best solutions, because someone who you didn't maybe think beforehand would have a great solution has a great idea, and everyone comes at it with their own experience and with their own kind of expertise. So I think, that was actually the most fun part of the whole process as well. And still we're having those conversations, because every time you get to a point and you think, oh, now we're in a good place. And then you realize, oh, now the data is telling us this, that can't be right. And then you have to kind of rethink, and it's a constant journey, I would say. You're never quite done.
I guess that's also the beauty of getting the data in front of you eventually, because that will actually tell you. You might have a guess of how your buildings are performing, for example, but when you actually see it, that's what makes you realize, like, okay, so this needs more attention than I actually imagined.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really unexpected. I remember when we first, we'll talk about that coming up, I know, the carbon pathways first went live, super exciting. Yeah. And we sort of saw how buildings were performing, and some of them were, you know, much lower in their carbon footprint than we had expected, and some much, much, much higher. And we thought, oh my goodness, what's happening in that? Like, it just raises all these new questions, and but also lots of opportunity, because sometimes a small adjustment or a small change in either, you know, the types of machines that are being used, or the way that the building is insulated, or something with renewable energy, small tweaks can then make a massive difference. But you don't know. It's a black box until you have the data.
I think that's a good moment maybe to show a little bit what we are talking about when we're talking about the carbon pathways, because everybody has an idea, I think, and it's just good to show what it looks like, at least in our Proprli platform, which is what you guys are also using for the Gateway Fund.
Absolutely.
Let me see if I can share my screen. And that might be a bit trippy in the beginning, but bear with me.
You'll get there in the end.
That should... Okay, can you see my screen?
I'm seeing some dots.
Oh, okay, yeah, I see.
Still
I see that you see some dots. That's...
I'm sure it's coming up.
Let's wait 1 second. Maybe if I stop and try again. Okay, yeah, okay. Right, now it should work, right?
Yes, I'm seeing. Oh, yeah, I see it.
Yeah, okay. I should just not go back to our to our meeting room, because then it becomes very trippy. This is just I put a demo account in front of us because that's a good example of data, which I think will show what the carbon pathway is and how you can work with it. So in this example, there is the blue line represents the performance, the actual performance of the building as it is now. And this is compared in first instance to the orange line, which is the CREM target. And as you know, the CREM is actually a translation of the Paris Proof Agreement to the real estate sector. So it's the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor is what it stands for. But it's it will actually tell you per country and per type of building, so whether it's an office or logistics, how much CO2 you are quote unquote allowed to emit year on year, moving towards 2050, where the goal is to have a total global warming of less than, preferably 1.5 degrees. So that means that you can benchmark how your building at the moment is performing against the CREM target line. And this is what also gave you guys, I guess, a lot of insight the moment you first saw the pathways, because this differs massively per building. Some buildings are way below and are performing really well and are only crossing that line near the 2050 mark, and others are already far above it, just like in this example, where the year-on-year energy usage and the CO2 that's being emitted with that is far exceeds what it should be. So in those cases, the challenge to get it down towards net zero is larger, of course, but it could also be that such a building can do with relatively simple improvements, as you mentioned. Maybe it's a very old building and the roof is due to be replaced in the next couple of years anyway. And when that's being done, the insulation can be increased, meaning that the gas usage, for example, will drop massively, and that has a huge impact on the CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
Now, this is an example where we plotted three sustainability projects, which are quite common, I would say, which is improving the insulation, installing heat pumps, or installing solar panels on the roof can have an impact on the pathway. And the simulated performance is actually what you're using to plan towards net zero. And that's, of course, the topic of today. This is just to give the viewers a bit of an insight into what we are talking about when we are discussing the carbon pathways. And I guess what is interesting to know, in combination with the collaboration with your property manager, is that these items, these projects, they're not just thought out of, they're not coming out of thin air. These are actually linked to another element which is already part of the platform, which is the multi-year maintenance plan. So this is something that every property manager and every fund manager is aware of, is you're planning towards, well, the next 10 years and all the different projects that are related to that. And some of the projects are already sustainability kind of projects, and others might have to be added. So this gives a little bit of insight. I'm not sure if I can stop. I don't know. Let me go back.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Just got a very trippy image of you 15 times into the future.
Yeah, exactly.
No, this is exactly the tool. I think that it's for us incredibly valuable. Speaking of, CapEx and financial planning, being able to simulate the impact of investments that are sustainability related has completely changed, I think, the way that we work with our MGOPs, with our multi-year maintenance plans.
Yeah,
it's incredibly valuable to be able to plan knowing what impact it's going to have, and
Yeah, yeah.
having those real-time insights. So yeah, that was a real breakthrough. I think once that went live, it changed everything, and it's just made life so much easier for us, having that single source of truth in terms of being able to, have your MGOPs, and then being able to track the carbon pathways and the various potential changes, and then also being able to tender out those projects. Yeah, I think hats off for you guys for making that happen, because I know on the back end that there's a ton of data and calculations and things that need to happen, magic that needs to be worked that I have no
Yeah.
understanding of.
No, it's been a challenge, but it's really cool to see the live carbon pathways being plotted on yeah, in the tool. But what I find really interesting as well is we have been involved with you guys and with your strategy and your sustainability goals from, as you said early on. We've
Yeah,
been part of the conversations from the beginning, and that's still happening. So one of the things you mentioned, I guess, is the circularity. And I think that's also
yeah,
a very, very cool project, because that goes beyond what most companies are working with or thinking of. And not just think of how can we make things more circular, but also how can we measure it, and how can we do this in a way. Maybe you can explain a little bit how you tackled that project, because it was also looking at what already existed, not just the buildings, but also the multi-year maintenance plans, all the plans that were already there
hmm
of the projects that we're going to do anyway.
hmm
What can we do in terms of circularity, and what is the impact of that?
yeah. I mean, I think there's no easy answer to that because it's happening as we speak. And
Yeah,
I think we have a meeting on this early next week to talk
we do.
with our
Yeah,
circularity consultant, I guess, expert who we've asked to help us with this topic on exactly that. How are we going to then automate the impact, and how are we going to track the data on making those circular changes, but also being able to see exactly how much carbon are we saving, and can we
yeah,
then use that to either plot it in our carbon pathways or in some other way make that insight trackable for us, so that we can share that information with the sector and with our investors. And
yeah,
even if it doesn't end up being something that we can use towards, for instance, a GRESB or a different framework, we still think it's valuable enough to make those changes anyway. And there is a huge amount of impact that can be made. So, for instance, I don't have the data right this second, but
mm,
um, we looked at roofs. So,
yeah,
roofing is a huge thing in logistics because obviously there's a lot of roof, and
yeah,
we already are very much ahead of the game when it comes to solar. So, if our roofs don't yet have solar and solar panels on them, we're in the process of doing that, or the roofs for whatever reason can't hold the solar panels because they're not potentially strong enough, then
yeah,
we're either going to reinforce those roofs or find a different solution. So that's one aspect that we're pretty comfortable saying, that we have that under control. But what can we do with the material that's underneath those solar panels? So the roofing itself, the bitumen, which is often the material
hmm,
used. So there's new, much more circular alternatives out there where you can save just incredible amounts of carbon because those new resources aren't having to be pulled, because it's 100% recycled bitumen that's being used for that roofing. So we got the
yeah,
calculations in of the potential savings in terms of carbon, and we were just blown away. So
yeah,
that's, and that's an easy change. If it's not a huge
exactly.
cost increase, then we're more than willing to make that change. So that's one aspect. And then also the terrain itself. So choosing climate adaptive alternatives for concrete or for paving stones, allowing for more green to happen on those terrains. Those are also big changes in terms of what you can save with carbon if it's a recycled product, a circular product, and then finding a way to track that in properly. And I'm confident that we're going to make that happen. That means that we can just see over time, how much carbon we're saving by using circular alternatives, and that's just really exciting. So, yeah,
I think so too,
about
because
that.
it just goes one step
Yeah,
further, I think. And
yeah,
in the very beginning, I mentioned that ESG being a buzzword, it still stands for something because it mentions environmental, but also the social and the governance, and
for sure.
those elements are also part of your strategy. It's not just environmental.
No,
And we've of course discussed this as well, and we've also worked together in a way. We call it the SDG dashboard, but it's how we can maybe start measuring the aspects that are not that don't have a direct impact on your energy performance, for example.
yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the how you guys work with the SDG framework and how
Sure.
we are collaborating on that?
Well, probably good to mention then that I'm beyond. So I manage the Gateway Fund in terms of ESG and communications, but I'm also responsible for a lot of the other funds and projects kind of within our company. So one of the other funds that we have is more an office fund with office buildings, and I guess it's implicit in the name. There's a lot of people who work in offices, so the social aspect comes in much more when it relates to office real estate and when it relates to logistics real estate.
Yeah.
And there we're much more focused on, yes, energy efficiency, yes, waste management, water, solar on the roof, all those things, but also how can we ensure that these buildings bring health and well-being, which is just a fancy way of saying make people feel good
Yeah,
when they're there.
exactly.
So that is something that is quite intrinsic to our way of working already. But again, how can you make that data led and trackable and measurable? So that's where we've been working with Properly closely on translating those aspects of our ESG strategy into automated way that we can integrate it within the SDG dashboard. So we like to use the SDGs, which is the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN.
Yeah.
There's 17 of them, and they're kind of just categories, I guess, within which you
Yeah.
can structure your ESG strategy. And they're symbols and icons that everyone knows. They're universally recognized, and that makes it a nice way to structure your strategy because someone sees it, they see, oh, you're focusing on health and well-being, sustainable cities, climate action. I understand where you're going with that. Like it just is, it's
Yeah.
a nice way to label what you're trying to achieve with your fund or with your company. And when it comes to health and well-being, there's things that are kind of trackable, like air quality. And so we work with a company called Healthy Workers who focus on meters and tracking the air quality within office buildings, which is quite interesting to see. And it can be quite on a detailed level as well. So integrating that data into Properly was something that we worked on. I think it was last year. So that's one part of kind of the social category of our ESG strategy, and then other things are less obvious, and that's I think where we've been racking our brains of how can we make this part of the Properly dashboard. Things like movement. So you want to,
Yeah. For
yeah,
example.
that was a tough one. I think
Yeah.
we still haven't 100% figured that one out, but basically you want
It's
to
also
encourage.
it's also work in progress. But I guess
It's a work in progress.
it again is it's interesting to see how you can still make such a strategy more measurable and see if you're living up to it, and if you're if one of the goals is to improve the use of the stairs instead of using the lifts, for example,
For
then
example, yeah,
how can make sure, how can you measure that? How can
yeah,
you make sure that that's actually happening, or what can we do as a building owner
yeah.
to stimulate using the stairs instead of the lifts? So one of the things could be putting up signage and making people aware. Well,
Yeah,
that is something that you can measure. So you can
Yes.
say, did we put up signage to stimulate the use of the stairs instead of the lift?
Yeah.
Yes or no? And I think just working and thinking of it in such a way is very interesting. I think because then it's not just a strategy, as you said, that ends up in a PowerPoint that ends up somewhere on the drive that nobody looks at anymore,
Yeah.
but it becomes something active and something that you keep on coming back to. It
Agree.
starts to
And
live.
and
Yeah.
it also just starts the conversation, and
Yeah. True.
it makes us think better about how we can make the building more user friendly. And so things like having a gym is great, but if no one knows about the gym, no
Yeah.
one's going to use the
Yeah.
gym. So
Yeah.
communication again, and then that's something we can track because the gym has a key pass entry, in a lot of our
Yeah.
buildings, our office buildings. And so, how many times has it been opened, and is that amount increasing over time because we had a campaign around use of the gym, and we went around all our tenants and explained, and or we had a tenant event, where we did a presentation, or we had a yoga class for free in the foyer, and that kind of
Yeah.
increase. So those are all methods
Very
that we
interesting.
use and that we're really interested in, doing across our whole office portfolio. And it makes you think about how you can get those data numbers up as long as you are tracking. I think there's just quite a human tendency. If you see a graph, you want to make sure that graph is going in the right direction. And so
Yeah.
your whole team is going to get involved in making that positive progress. So I think getting things into the Properly dashboard is really good because it gives us the oversight of how are we performing and how can we increase over time, and make it better.
Yeah. I think just a very brief show of what we mean by the SDG dashboard,
Yeah.
and that will be a very quick one, and then we can let me see if this works. Yep. Let's move away. And I believe, yes. So this is an example again of the SDG dashboard on Properly, and all the colorful figures tells you something about how you are performing on the targets that you have set yourself. So the base framework is the SDGs, as you mentioned, the sustainable development goals. When you click on this, you can select from the 17 standard topics. Now, within those topics, you can, for example, affordable and clean energy, you can set your own targets. An example could be to have solar panels on all of the roofs. That could be a main goal. And that could be a target, and a sub target could be, well, before you can do that, you should have your feasibility study done, your subsidies requested, etc. So this is how you can set up your or translate this strategy that you might have, and then start measuring how your portfolio is performing compared to all of the goals that you've set. So when you have these are an example of a couple of buildings, which then you can set and measure literally. Okay, do we have we done this, or is this planned? So, for example, green Dutch energy contracts is one of the goals. We don't have this for this building, but we do have this planned to be done in 2026, for example. You can leave a comment and save it. Now, the idea of this is to give you an overview of how your portfolio is performing, and it's again trying to translate a more fuzzy strategy into something measurable that you can track over time. So this is just a short introduction of what the SCG dashboard means.
And maybe also just to add on to that, Gun, it's
Yeah.
also part of that is being able to report on those goals as well, right? So
Yes, of course.
it's a
Yeah.
nice way to be able to communicate to your team, but also to your external stakeholders and investors potentially. Look, this is how we did this year, and it makes your annual report work a lot workload a lot lighter because you're able to just click basically, and then of course you can blend the layout or add introductory linears and copy whatever, but the base is there on how you've performed that year on the goals that you've set. So it is also a really nice feature of the tool.
So as one of the final things, what would you like to pass on to other companies who are struggling with the whole ESG topic and trying to set up a strategy or trying to put it into practice?
I think two things: keep it simple and involve your team and involve your property managers and your prop tech partners as much as possible, as early as possible. If you start with a few open brainstorm sessions to formulate first your goals, where you want to go on like a high level, and then try to get them as concise and concrete and as data-led as possible, that's going to make your life a lot easier. But just take it in phases and then drill it down to get it to the place where you can actually start implementing. And then you just have to start. You just have to start, even if it's not perfect, and even if you haven't worked out all the details. Start collecting data, analyze it, and learn as you go. Don't get sidetracked by complicated platforms and expensive consultants and well-marketed certifications. Decide what you want to improve and then just go out and do it.
Amazing.
That's what I would suggest. But it's also not easy, and I know that, and it is complicated, but you can do a lot. And I think people underestimate the impact that they can have.
Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, getting the team involved, getting the property manager involved and explaining this, what you did from the beginning really well. It's not just getting the stakeholders involved and tell them, okay, I need this from you and I need this from you. It's explaining
asking questions.
It's asking questions, but also explaining what you're trying to achieve. And that's saying, I don't have all the answers. I know I want to contribute. I want to do whatever is in my power to improve sustainability within within the realm and ask questions. So the property manager has a ton of knowledge. So much knowledge about all the buildings and the tenants and
how the tenants use the buildings and how the buildings are used. I think that's something that we, in our meeting rooms, in our office towers, we don't see how those buildings are actually used. And the property manager, they're your eyes and ears. And they're also the ones who are going to have to be executing your ESG strategy on the ground. So they're the ones who potentially are getting you the data that you need to see if you are performing and if it is working. So if they're not involved and if they don't feel involved, I think that's also a big part of it. If they don't feel like you value their input and their opinion, then the collaboration isn't going to be where you need it to be. So you are a team. It's not about us instructing a property manager to execute X, Y, and Z and then not giving them the context of why are we actually doing this. It's about doing it together and asking the questions and making it practical from the outset. So I think that really, co-collaboration is such an expensive word, but it just means asking questions and doing it as a team.
Exactly. Because the property manager 9 out of 10 times also knows what is actually feasible and what is not.
Exactly.
Because you can think something amazing like solar panels on the roof, but the property manager can already tell you within a minute, I'm sorry, but that's not possible because of these and these reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know. Well, that's really valuable. All right. Is there anything else that you would like to share, or can we?
I think it was a great chat, and I really appreciate the time. Maybe one thing about property managers, seeing as we kind of ended on that note as well. I think they can be an undervalued aspect of the real estate process as a whole, and that is a shame. And I think that deserves reconsideration. They are an incredibly valuable part of your business. Without them, your building is not going to get managed and your tenants aren't going to be happy. And I think we're lucky in having a very collaborative property manager who are super involved and very enthusiastic and supportive about the sustainable changes that we want to make to our portfolio and that we are making. And they're really almost at the forefront of that. Kevin, our lead property manager, is constantly sending me examples from the market and from the field of, look at this cool green facade that I saw at this building, and is this something that we could do? So I think that's a great example of how the relationship can be. But I would encourage all actors in the commercial real estate space to really value your property managers in the way that you work with them. But I think their remuneration also deserves reconsideration. Sometimes they are the ones that sort of catch the brunt of the value chain, and that's not the way it should be.
I'm glad you brought it up, because it's it is a topic that lives within Properli as well. We see this time and again. Our software is heavily being used by property managers, and we can see the demand that is increasing from their client side, from building owners, asset managers, but also from the tenant side. They're expecting more and more, and the property manager is right in the middle of it. And they don't get more time and they don't get more money, but they are being expected to deliver more and more quickly. But yes, I think it's a fair topic to mention that they are a bit undervalued.
I agree.
For what they deliver.
Yeah, I agree. But hopefully this will change that sort of attitude a little bit with the people who are watching. So, but mainly I just hope, that everyone gets a bit more enthusiastic about sustainability in real estate, because there is so much to be done. At the moment we contribute 40% to the carbon footprint globally as a real estate industry. That's massive, and it's not getting much smaller despite all the actions being taken. We're still building more, and not always very sustainably. So we have the opportunity to do that because we, have a privileged position here in Western Europe. So let's take that opportunity and really make those changes and have some fun along the way as well.
Yeah, exactly. Keep on asking the question, what can we do? Yeah.
Great.
Amazing. Thanks for your time, Charlotte.
No problem. Thank you.
I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too.
And I hope everyone who watches this enjoyed it as well.